Okay, good morning, everybody. As people are still trickling in, I'm going to get started here. My name is Dr. Joshua Dickhouse. I am the director of the Charlie Steiner School of Sports Communication here at Bradley. Welcome to the 6th annual Charlie Steiner Symposium on Sports Communication. So as we get going here, there's just a few things I'd like to say. One, we want to thank our partners in this event with the Peoria Chiefs, who have been very generous with us. We want to thank all of our panelists who will be introduced by our moderator. We thank all of our moderators who are here. As a person who's worked on this for a really long time, these things don't come together overnight, and so there are a few people I'd like to say thank you to. Dr. Paul Gollifer, who helped me plan this the whole time. Then Dr. Situng Gua, who is in her first year here at Bradley, was so instrumental in helping us with this. Professor Chris Marsh, Professor Paige Dean. Of course, we want to thank the Dean of our college, Dr. Jeffrey Huberman, who's our biggest champion. Mr. Dave Linney, Kevin. I forgot your last name. Kevin Wall. For helping us with all of this. This has become a great event, and we're super thrilled to have you all here. Okay, we have a lot of great topics for today, a lot of great guests. All of them are fantastic. We have Mr. Bob Lee here from SportsCenter fame with Charlie, has joined us as well. Many academics as well have come this way. And so we always like to start this event by having our namesake, the reason we're here, Mr. Charlie Steiner, come and say a few words. So, Mr. Steiner.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, everybody. First and foremost, it's nice to be back at the symposium. Last 2 years, there was this pandemic. It was in all the papers. So finally, we are now getting back to normal. And just when we were able to circle this day, there was an enormous sense of relief. Come on in. We're just getting started.
Grab a seat wherever.
When I first came to Bradley, I am now 73 years old. In 1967, we had 2 radio and television courses, ingeniously entitled Radio TV 101, Radio TV 201. That was it. Of course, we did not know what sports would turn into, what media would turn into, what the internet, social media turned into. We had no idea. And it was inconceivable to us then that, A, I would have a school in my name involving the industry that I have spent my entire life in. And I was very lucky to have come to Bradley at a time that I did. Little did I know then that some of the great sportscasters in the history of our profession happened to be here or work in Peoria, whether it was Jack Brickhouse, the immortal voice of the Cubs, Chick Hearn, Ralph Lawler, Bill King. The list goes on, and I'm very happy that many graduates now of the Steiner School have gone on and actually made a career out of what they've come away with here. As sports grew, as media grew, as all of this stuff grew from nothing. About 15 years ago, they decided, let's see if we can put together a sports communication school. And again, little did we know even then it would take off in the fashion that it has, and I am enormously lucky and extremely thankful for all of you to be here today. And we can talk individually, if you like, when the program is in break or when it's all over. I guess my point is that when I got here and we had a carrier current radio station, and on a big night I'd be playing records and maybe 12 kids would be listening in various dorms, that we would be talking about subjects now that would have been utterly inconceivable then. For instance, this is the 50th anniversary of Title IX. When I arrived, Title IX didn't have a title yet. So this is now obviously a very big, important, relevant topic. That's what we're going to begin with this morning. And in our next panel, athletes and mental health, another topic utterly inconceivable, was not on anybody's menu 50 years ago. Just wasn't. Inclusion and diversity. Essentially, my business when I started, much less when I was here, was an old boys network, or essentially a young boys network. And sports entrepreneurship. Utterly inconceivable. So I guess my point is this industry that you guys are just entering, where it's going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, and when you're an old fart like me, 50 years from now, you're going to look back and say, oh my goodness, how could it have possibly gone in the direction that it has? And I find myself wondering that every day. And tonight, I'm so grateful. Bob Lee, who is the working definition of a sports journalist, and we were together at ESPN. I was there for 14 years, and 12 of the 14, I was co-anchoring with Bob at, I guess it was 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock Eastern time every night. And for 7 of those 12 years, Robin Roberts, who's got a pretty good gig now, the three of us were together. And so we were enormously lucky to work together at the time that we did. And as a result, here I am with you today. So with that, welcome. This is our 6th and many more to come. Have a great day, and I hope you learn a little bit of something. Thank you. Josh?
Okay, then, without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Malcolm Moran, the moderator for our 9 a.m. panel on the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Josh, and thanks for the kind words. My name is Malcolm Moran. I'm the director of the Sports Capital Journalism program at IUPUI in Indianapolis. I'm also the executive director of the United States Basketball Writers Association. And in addition to the thank yous, I would just like to add a thank you to Charlie for bringing us here, putting this in place, and making this possible. Very quickly, Charlie used the word normal, and it is wonderful to be stepping toward normalcy, but one thing you need to know about this program, this is not normal. This is an extraordinary day where you'll have access to the minds of people that have so much to offer. And don't take my word for it, just listen, invest in every meeting, whether you're interested in that subject or not, because when you walk these halls and you see all the pictures of the people that have been part of this, it really is extraordinary. One quick request, rather than the traditional wait until the end and then we'll do the Q&A, I think it would be much better for everybody if this becomes a conversation as we go along. So even if early on, if someone makes an observation that you would like to know more about or get an elaboration or you have a question about it, please don't hesitate. And for all you Bradley Braves and prospective Bradley Braves or IUPUI Jaguars, welcome and please be engaged. It is an honor to be a part of this, and you have the information about each of the panelists, so I don't want to take up too much time, but just to condense and reinforce the richness of what they bring to this conversation. Mickey Shalao is in her 50th year of coaching, and she claims that she's partly retired from the teaching part, but continues coaching. She will explain the unique look that she brings to us today, and what that says about relationships with your students. In 1989, she started the women's golf program at Bradley. She competed pre-Title IX in the AIAW days and began coaching the year that Title IX became law. So please welcome Mickey and thank her for being here. Jen Jones, to your left, is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Academics and Student Development and the Senior Women's Administrator in her 24th year at Bradley. In her softball career at St. Louis University, she was an All-American Scholar, and under her watch, directing academic support since 1999, Bradley has routinely been among the national leaders in graduation rates. So please welcome Jen. And Maggie Mertens, to your right, an independent journalist based in Seattle. I mean, we would miss lunch if I delivered all the accolades, but very briefly, her work has appeared in the year's Best Sports Writing 2021, Women in Sports in the United States, and the 2021 story for The Atlantic, This Woman Surfed the Biggest Wave of the Year, was nominated for the Dan Jenkins Medal for Excellence in Sports Reporting at the University of Texas. So please welcome Maggie. And I thought one way, and we could start with Mickey, if each of you briefly could describe your personal journey as this structure has evolved thanks to Senator Birch Bayh from Indiana and others who were responsible. In one sentence, what I can say is, despite the apparent eligibility issues, I have been a beneficiary of Title IX, because when I think back to my previous life as a journalist, some of the most rewarding, the richest, the most fun events and people that I covered were women whose participation was made possible by that law. So, Mickey, if you could describe your personal journey and how Title IX altered that course.
Well, when I was in high school, I went to a small school in Iowa, and I was crazy about girls basketball. The first state championship was in 1920. And so when I was in high school, it was just a way of life in Iowa, girls basketball. And it's kind of funny when I meet somebody from Iowa, one of the first things you say is, "Did you play basketball?" Because it's just that way. But anyway, I played basketball there, and then I went on to play AAU basketball. I played a little bit at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and then I came down here, played softball for the Pekinlets, and we finished 5th in the national tournament, played against 4 foreign countries, and then I got a job at, well, it was Academy Spalding at that time, and I started the program. I got the job in '73, and that's when they started Title IX. So I started the program, and we had to take baby steps at first, and so then we just kept building on that, and hopefully, we've been successful in a lot of areas. And I apologize for my hair. My golf team a year ago said, "If we go to state, can we dye your hair?" So I said, okay. So last year it was all green, our school colors, and navy and green and white. And so this year they said, "If we go to state, can we dye your hair?" Okay, because I knew they were talking about it, and it was kind of motivating for them because I heard them talk. And so this year it's 2 different colors. As I said, our school colors are navy, green, and white. So I got navy, green, and if you look close, white's coming. But anyway, that's it.
Thanks, Mick. Jen, your journey as
Yes.
a result of the opportunities?
Yes, it's interesting. I actually had no intent of playing softball in college, and actually went to Notre Dame and was on the state softball team and had a good game, one game, and afterwards Lorraine Ramsey, who many of you may know, she's a legend in and of herself, she came up to my dad after the game and said, "Hey, where's your daughter going to school?" And I proudly said, "I'm going to Marquette." And she said, "And are you playing softball?" I said, "No." And she turned to my dad and said, "I'll give her 2 years for free with a stipend." And he shook hands, and that was my recruiting story. I was like, "What just happened?" And he's like, "You just paid for 2 years of school." So I ended up going to Illinois Central College and played there, and then transferred to St. Louis U, where I continued my career. Actually, very different experiences at the junior college level and the D1 level. I thought at the D1 level, it would be the best of the best, right? We would have every resource we need, and found out very quickly it was not the case. One of my first practices, they pulled out these cardboard boxes and said, "All right, try to find two that match." And I was like, what's happening right now? And so we started rifling through, and they were uniforms of all different shades of blue. And our goal was to find a top and a bottom that were the same color blue, and that was going to be our uniform to wear. And I knew that something kind of sparked inside me. I was like, this is not okay. So fast forward, I was trying to decide what to do with my undergrad English degree from St. Louis U, and a friend of mine actually was going to study athletic administration, and I started thinking about that, and I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, but that's what I'm going to do. So I went to grad school and ended up working as an assistant GM for an indoor football team here in Peoria, and from there met Vernette House-Browning, who had my position now at the time at Bradley, and she recruited me to come to the university 24 years ago. And so I think I've been able to use my experience as a student athlete to kind of help shape how I approach my job now in working with student athletes and trying to support them. And I also am a mother of 5, and including a daughter, and so I've really tried to help shape their experience as well and educate them along with all the student athletes at Bradley.
Yeah. So for me, Title IX, I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and I didn't really have an extensive knowledge of what Title IX was. It just was. I grew up playing school sports because that's what girls did, just like boys. And it wasn't until later in life that I really put together that was a change that had happened, that, my mom did not have school sports growing up. And I thought that was, pretty shocking. I started my career as a journalist, and I did a lot of writing on gender inequality. And at the time, those topics were kind of like, the wage gap at work, and, there aren't enough women CEOs. And because I was really interested in sports still, because I'd played growing up, I started thinking about women's sports in those same veins, and I started to see that, okay, you can be talking about the wage gap in business, but women's soccer players are making $15,000 a year, and is anyone talking about that? And so starting to kind of come at sports from that angle, I think, came from me being a member of a generation that grew up when Title IX was established. And, sports I saw as a gender inequality issue for that reason. So I think that's where I kind of came from.
Well, and to segue into that theme, one of the descriptions in a lot of the narrative looking at the 50-year period was that there has been all this growth and development, and there has been, but the reality is that very little really happened for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I think Maggie and Mickey and Jen could all speak to this. What it really came down to was that lawyers had daughters. And the more the daughters became frustrated because they were getting a little taste of what could be, but the commitment wasn't fully there. And it really wasn't until the early 90s. Maggie, you're nodding. Is that something that your reporting has uncovered?
Yeah, I've spoken with a lot of athletes of Mickey's generation and around that time that, you know, it was because of them that this law was implemented in the sports arena in the first place. Title IX is not a sports law, it's an education law. It literally does not say the word sports anywhere in it. It doesn't talk about physical education classes. It was because at that time, schools were extremely unequal. Colleges were legally allowed to deny an applicant because she was a woman. They were allowed to say, sorry, we've already filled our 2, business spots for women, so you can't go here. And that was the impetus behind these education amendments, to create a more equal educational world in the US. And at the time, there were girls that wanted to play sports. There were girls playing sports. There were basketball teams and softball teams that were at colleges, at high schools, that had no coaches, that had no uniforms. And so once Title IX was implemented, they were able to go into their sports director's office, go to their principals, go to their college presidents and say, look, this is a law now. Like, you need to hire someone for us. So there was a lot of personal advocacy from women athletes in particular.
Mickey, could you speak to the early frustration knowing that here's a law that's on the books, and yet on the ground, the resources early on just weren't coming the way that they were intended by the law?
Well, the girls at Academy Spalding, we had 2 gyms. The Spalding gym was a beautiful gym, had theater seats, and it was, it was great. But the Academy gym was tiny. There's about this much room between out of bounds and the brick wall. We had to play our games there. If you played volleyball there and somebody bumped it and it went up and hit the ceiling, it'd come down faster than it went up. And, it was just, it wasn't an ideal situation. And we were never allowed to go over and practice or play in the Spalding gym. And with softball, we didn't have a diamond. The boys didn't either. They used the Park District. What we'd do is get into cars, and since I did work for the Park District, I knew where all the softball diamonds were in town. So we'd get into about 3 or 4 cars, and we'd drive around until we found a softball diamond that wasn't being used. And so we would, that's how we would, get to practice. Golf-wise, that wasn't so bad because, some of the kids belonged to country clubs, and so they were able to practice there. But yeah, at first, well, volleyball, the school allowed us 3 volleyballs, okay? They were rubber, and so what happened in PE class one time, somebody kicked it and hit something by the windows and punctured it. So now we had 2 volleyballs to practice. And I mean, they were, it wasn't, and they wouldn't let us get any more. So anyway, that was in the bats. Softball bats, we did get a couple. The bats at that time cost $10. Now they cost about $450 each. And so way back then, we didn't, well, they didn't have the equipment like for bats, but for basketballs, we got the old ones that the guys didn't want. And, it was a struggle.
Jen, when you got into administration and started attending regional and national meetings, what do you recall about the level of frustration to try to find the resources to make these opportunities available?
Well, I think part of it was just lack of understanding, honestly, with a lot of people early on is, what exactly does Title IX mean? And, a lot of the earlier conversations we would hear was, we just don't have the money, we don't have the resources. And so there was actually a lack of understanding, too, of what exactly Title IX means. And I think there still is today in some regards. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to spend the exact same amount of money on every single sport. And, a lot of people would compare head to head, right? Baseball to softball. that's not how you do it as well. It's overall programs, women's and men's programs, but it's about the benefits to the student athletes. And so I think the early frustration was just the lack of understanding, and then immediately going to the resource piece, right? Well, the men's sports bring in so much more money, so we can spend more on the men because they're gonna bring more money in. And again, it all comes back to the experience of the students. And the coaches and the staff. And so, I think that's probably sitting in the room and hearing the same thing over and over again and just feeling like there wasn't a lot of movement. Athletics is a very fast-paced environment, especially college athletics. It's go, go, go. We feel like we're doing this all the time. And then to sit in those meetings and it feel like it's taking forever to see some of the changes implemented, it was very frustrating early on.
Please remember, if there are any questions or if you're hoping for elaboration, we have a question over there. Yeah, and if you could please stand up if possible, just so we could hear you.
A comment and a question, because something that one of you said about the early days brought something. For those of you who are as old as I am, and not too many people here like that, they would remember that Peoria Richwoods High School has a very storied, golden athletic history in basketball, football, and swimming, for that matter. My wife, when she who's now, tell her I said this, will be 73 in January, was a member of 2 straight national champion swimming relay teams. I guess it was AAU, I don't know what it was, when she was 11 and 12, and when she was 13, she came in 3rd place in an individual race and beat somebody who eventually went to the Olympics. And when she got to high school, beautiful pool, no women's sports. Now I realize title, who knows where who knows? And then, Title IX didn't, I don't know if it reaches some high schools or not, but that's not what's important. And now that Title IX has evolved to provide a much larger degree of equality, I wonder, now that if it's out of its infancy and is all grown up, is there any thought how the name, likeness, and image program rules or whatever, does it provide possibly a mechanism to circumvent the purpose for which Title IX is? Because I don't know if there's any rules that say the All-American quarterback, the all-conference volleyball striker is entitled to as much as the All-American quarterback or whatever. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Is it, because I don't know if those really aren't university-associated things, but there's got to be a tie between university boosters and university personnel behind. And I just wondered, does that provide a mechanism to circumvent the things that Title IX was meant to protect?
You want to handle that, Maggie? Well, because
You've
this is
hit a very hot topic in NIL,
well, this
for
is
sure.
about the marketplace.
Yeah, so NIL, name, image, and likeness. Actually, Opendorse, which is one of the major companies who helps student athletes with their name, image, and likeness branding, and a lot of universities have hired to kind of help with their NIL efforts, recently released that 6 of the top 10 sports are women's sports as far as the money making. And so I think that's really interesting that NIL is open to anybody, and actually, it's up to the student athletes and their schools to help ensure that they have the opportunities. We've started at Bradley an NIL website, and what we do, I can speak to personally. It's not specific to men's or women's. We have the same educational resources. We have invested in a partnership with Influencer, who is a company that helps provide everything from personal branding to compliance software. And we've also initiated a local exchange. So if a women's golfer wants to explore possibilities, she can opt in and put her social media handles on and can look for opportunities both locally and through our global exchange for name, image, and likeness deals. So it's not specific to men's or women's. I think what you're going to see is some of the collectives, right? And that's a little different. So collectives are an independent organization, and you're seeing more of those right now on like men's basketball side and the football side, where you have independent people who are, you know, hardcore fans who have formed collectives to kind of help ensure that you know, their student athletes have opportunities. We have seen a couple schools, ISU being one, who have been able to do all sport collectives, and that's kind of the next wave, right? So it's also difficult right now with NIL because it's state-specific laws. So what you can do in Illinois, you can't necessarily do in Iowa, meaning that the NCAA has these overarching rules, but then it goes down to the states. And so Illinois is actually fairly progressive. They passed a law last year where schools now can be involved. So we've been able to provide some of that, you know, the educational resources, and we've done the partnership, and we can help with some of those opportunities, whereas teams in our conference, their athletic departments can't be involved in any of the NIL deals because their state hasn't gotten to that point yet. So it's a mess right now, and we're all kind of trying to figure it out as we go, because it is something newer. But what I do love about it is that student athletes, you know, men and women, you know, alike, are able to pursue opportunities based on their own name, image, and likeness.
Thank you.
So is the name, image, and likeness process, and I know it's really early in this, and everybody's trying to figure it out, but can it be an equalizer? Is it too soon? I mean, is there?
I would say I think there's some interesting intersections with Title IX and gender inequality. I know when NIL was first kind of being proposed, I think it started actually in California as a state law. They were really pushing hard that this could really help women athletes, because women athletes have been historically, you know, had to be more advocates for themselves. They didn't have, you know, necessarily their program funding that was the same, et cetera. So they did really have to sell themselves, and social media has been a big part of that in recent years. So there has been exciting things to do with that. But there's also, I think there's also hesitations. And, you know, Tara Vanderveer, who's Stanford's women's basketball coach, said recently, you know, this is going to be bad for women because it's all about their image. It's all about, you know, it's this problem that's been here for women athletes, is that, you know, there's been, okay, you'll get a sponsorship deal, but only if you're white and thin and pretty, and, you know, you have to fit this mold. So Tara Vanderveer was saying that, you know, it's going to be the pretty athletes that get these big deals. So then there's going to be, and that's a big problem in sports programs in general, is, you know, body image and making sure that we have healthy athletes as well as, you know, ones that perform up to their best ability. So there's been a lot of interesting things going on with NIL. There have been a lot of women athletes who have signed big deals. But, you know, if you have the marketing teams at universities that are still pushing their football teams and their men's basketball teams above all, those are the people that are probably going to get more deals.
Who should be taking the lead? I mean, because, you know, when you talk about body image, now we're going directly to mental health.
That's another panel.
Which is another panel, and I'm not trying to encroach, but we're talking about the health and well-being of student athletes, and so when you see this pattern developing, that the marketing opportunity has less to do with athletic ability and achievement and more to do with something else, is there anybody that can be taking the lead to put that back on the rails?
I think it's everybody's responsibility, anybody who's associated with the students. You know, it's a team of people, honestly, who help ensure, not only from the educational side, you know, that we're doing a good job making sure they know what the resources are, you know, but also helping them with those connections. You know, we talk about mental health every day, seemingly, you know, in our world in college athletics. And, you know, it's really important that we take away some of that stigma, you know, and I know you're going to talk all about mental health at the next panel, so we won't go too deeply into it, but I feel like my role as it relates to NIL with the student athletes is to educate them across the board and to help them form those relationships and take advantage of things that might not necessarily just be based on, the image. It could be teaching clinics in their hometown, connecting them with people, with whom they could make some type of, deal and making sure they know what options are out there. Personal branding is just one piece of it, but it's a huge world out there with NIL, and it could be anything from podcasts to, like I said, clinics in their hometown. It can be autographs, and I feel like we're just on the tip of the iceberg. And obviously Bradley's a very different institution than Oregon, right? And some of the other schools where it's in their face every single day. But the stress, is obviously a concern where they feel like they're always trying to keep up. Yeah.
Mickey, when you look at the whole evolution, was there a certain point that you can recall where you began to feel there's real progress here now, that like we're getting closer in terms of opportunities to where the law intended all along? Was there any point that you remember where you were heartened?
I think back, this is pretty early, but in 78, 79, the girls golf team, we made it to state for 2 years. Now, I had 3 golfers that I knew played golf. And then for some magical reason, a family from Quincy moved in town and they had 3 golfers, girls that played on the team. And it was like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, here we are. And we finished second and third in state. And that was like, wow, we made it. And against all these teams from the Chicago suburban area, that was, they were very good. But when you talk about mental health, one of the big problems I have is parents. I had this past year, about a year ago, I had a girl say, it was in April, she said, I can't wait till the end of October. And she said, golf will be over. And she said, because my dad thinks I should win state. And I mean, they were getting pressured at home to do well. And I think that's one of the problems that we have, in high school, particularly in golf, from my standpoint, is that they are pressured to do well. And, one stroke can make the difference in winning or losing. And then they go home and they hear from the parents the entire round, what you do here, you should have done this. And, I think, they just put too much pressure on the kids.
Have women's programs begun to emulate, in an unfortunate way, the pressures that have existed forever on the men's side?
That's something I was going to mention listening to Mickey there is, there's, when we talk about gender inequality, it's not always the best thing for everyone for, trying to get for women what men have. And I think sports is a really great example of that, just because we want equality, just because we want women's athletes to be treated well and to have investment, doesn't mean that, the program and the way that men's sports, especially at the college level, especially at the school level, is run is the right way to do it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity when we're talking about equality to, focus again on the athletes, focus again on what's best for students. And what's best for sports in general might not be, this kind of race to the most competitive or like the biggest budget or whatever it is, if that's not the best for everyone. And so it's, an opportunity to also rethink these kinds of systems.
Yes, we have a question.
Tying a couple of these topics together. In the business world, in the Fortune 500 companies, 96% of the women in C-suite positions, so decision-making positions, CEO, CFO, COO, have one thing in common, they were all athletes. And of them, 84% were collegiate athletes. So a couple of things. As it relates to NIL, more and more decision makers at companies are going to be women. They're looking at that, especially making the decisions with respect to sponsorship, product placement, so that eventually should definitely benefit those women seeking NIL support. But the other thing, as it relates to the bias towards those companies seeking women, it's because they look at those women who've been athletes of having a greater sort of mental strength, and a lot of other factors that are developed by being young athletes, in many cases from a young age. So it's really a demonstration of how how Title IX is working, and the gender equality is really leading towards breaking through some of these glass ceilings at the corporate level.
Any questions, observations, thoughts? For each of you, and unfortunately we're running out of time, but one thing I did want to ask, there's been a growing controversy, not a firestorm yet, but I could see it off in the distance, about this question. Should the NCAA men's and women's Final Four ever be in the same city in the same weekend? Your thoughts? And it seems like the responses are polar opposite.
It depends on which day of the week you ask me. Yeah, truly, I think it's a struggle. It's kind of what you alluded to, Maggie, where what's best for one sport is not always best for the other. And I think we've made so many strides in women's basketball, especially in the last year, with some of the task forces that have been built to really analyze the differences. And I think there's something to be said for the women having, some of the same opportunities and resources and branding, but not necessarily on the same footprint with the men. But then I also understand the argument for it as well, right? Dr. Chris Reynolds is the head of the men's basketball committee, and this is a hot topic, obviously, that comes up nearly every day, probably in his world. I don't really have an answer for that. I think it's one that we continue to discuss. And even basketball coaches, school to school, have different opinions on how it would affect their world.
Becky, your thoughts? Is that something you would like to see or hate to see?
I kind of hate to see it because as far as getting publicity and TV coverage and coverage on newspapers, if you have the two going on, I think guys would take up more space on the TV coverage, and so I think maybe having it in two separate places would increase women's sports.
Maggie, your thoughts? Because that plays to the inequality question.
Sure. I think what Jen said is right. It's more important that the women's basketball tournament gets the same amount of funding, gets the same weight rooms, gets the same access to facilities.
Well, which was an issue in the bubble.
Right. I don't know if you all saw Sedona Prince's TikTok a couple years ago, but there are still very wide gulfs of inequality in how those things are marketed, in how those TV deals are sold, et cetera. And I think it's just far more important to have, both of those Final Four tournaments, both of the games on, accessible television, and that, they're sold in the same way. They only started calling the women's tournament March Madness this year. They wouldn't use that term to sell the women's tournament because that was the men's tournament. So even though people would still call it that. The NCAA app for March Madness did not have women's games on it. So, I think it's just far more important that they're treated the same way. And sometimes when we talk about sports equality, we start asking these questions and they're not the right questions. So, it's really just about that initial investment and giving the opportunity. Sure, maybe someday down the road, have them in the same city, see how it goes. But, I think there's just far more groundwork to be laid.
Which leads to the next 50 years. And given the investment that each of you has made in all of this, is there one thing, are there multiple things that you would hope would be achieved from here on out to improve these opportunities?
Well, you know, if you have a girl athlete in high school and goes to college and she's successful there, I think she would be a good person. She's a leader, and she can help other kids, you know, progress in their sports. But it's you're going to be frustrated, no doubt about it, if you try to have girls' sports equal with guys. It hasn't gotten there yet, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there, and you know, it's tough.
Jen, your thoughts going forward? What you would advocate for, what you would like to see?
Well, you know, I think we still have a lot of work to do, obviously. USA Today in their article discussing Title IX, I think it was falling short of 50, you know, they reported that 87% of schools still don't have equal opportunities for women. So something that was really the basis for, you know, the Title IX 50 years ago, just opportunity, we're still falling short, you know, 50 years later. And so I think we really need to ensure that the opportunity is there, and then from there, everything else stems.
Well, and the disturbing thing about that reporting was that it appeared that in a number of places the numbers were manipulated by institutions to make it appear that the opportunities were more widespread than the reality.
Yep.
Maggie, is that something that, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you've done a lot of work in that area?
Yeah, I mean, one of the legal experts that I spoke to for a piece I did on Title IX told me, you know, I don't think there's probably one institution in the entire nation that's completely in compliance with Title IX. Like, and so if we're there 50 years later, that's, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. I also think, you know, for me, like 50 years from now, I hope we're not talking so much about, you know, siloed things like men's basketball and women's basketball. Like, I hope we're talking about basketball programs. You know, I hope that there's less, I think the more that we kind of segregate these ideas as like, we must catch up, like the women need to catch up, the less that we're kind of like looking at programs holistically, and the less that we're giving students, you know, equal opportunity to just play sports that they love, right? And so I hope that that's just kind of, we start to see sports as opportunities that students are interested in, regardless of their sex, regardless of their gender identity, and are able to do that. And, you know, that we don't have to constantly be playing catch up to some, you know, men's sport as the epitome of whatever is best.
Before Title IX, Peoria High School had play days, and a lot of schools around here, they were allowed 2 play days a year. So, and they had about 5 sports that they were allowed to have. And so what they would do is 8 schools would come together, and they would play 4 basketball games in one day. So, you know, there's always this thing going, talk about it's too strenuous, girls can't take it, you know, because it's too strenuous on their bodies and everything. But yet, they play 4 games in one day. So when Title IX came, and they made the announcement at Peoria High School, any girls interested in coming out for girls basketball, come to a meeting, you know, at such and such time. 150 girls came.
Right, and if that's the amount of change that's happened in 50 years, like, you can imagine, like, there's so much opportunity to continue towards equality in ways that we're probably not even thinking of now.
We just have a few minutes left, and I don't want Charlie to be mad at me because we're not going to run over, but I want to make sure that there's an opportunity. Any questions at all about anything that's been discussed? Maggie, one related issue that you've done reporting on is the the future of the transgender community and how it is incorporated into all this? I mean, any thoughts based on what you've learned about that direction?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as it relates to Title IX, everyone should have equal opportunity to have access to sport. And that includes the transgender community. It includes, people with gender diverse identities. And I don't think that there should be this weaponization of Title IX that's happening in a lot of states to try to keep transgender students from playing sports. It seems like that's spreading, unfortunately, although, the Biden administration has said that should not be how Title IX is used. But I do think, there's lots of opportunities to kind of think outside the box and start to think differently about these ways that we're giving opportunities to student athletes.
The Olympic Committee has talked about having an open division. So there'd be in the Olympics men, women, and then open. So, but there's just talk.
Yes, we have a question.
And it seems like the boys like the boys specifically who are worried about transgender women in women's sports aren't really worried about how they compete. It really just seems like they're being transphobic because do they watch women's sports? I don't think so.
Right.
I think they're just being transphobic.
This is a really good point. If you're worried about women's sports, right, then advocate for more money invested and then advocate for better marketing deals. I think that's a really great point.
Well, and part of that discussion is that historically, sports have been the vehicle that have broken down those barriers. Where, I've done plenty of stories about either African American athletes or white athletes that grew up not knowing anyone in the other group, but sports brought them together, and perhaps this could be another area of building understanding and acceptance because of that common goal. One last question for a brave or a prospective brave. Come on, we're in the business of asking questions. Yes.
Do you think any changes need to be made to Title IX? For example, the second prong of it comes to mind of how universities are kind of using it as an scapegoat instead of adding programs. They're kind of using it to take away and not have to add. So do you think there needs to be any changes or additional prongs added to it?
I think that's all in the interpretation again, right? Like we can see that universities or institutions can make any excuse, right? They can say, oh, we had to cut all of these boys' sports programs because of Title IX. Well, no, they didn't. They might have had less people signing up for baseball or whatever it is, and it might have just been the best financial reasoning. Also, those are just, I think it's an implementation question rather than going back to
The philosophy.
the philosophy, which is really, we can't discriminate, which is how it should be, in my opinion, yeah.
And it's tough because, schools are different, right? School to school. And so that's why you have the three prongs. And schools do have the ability to choose the prong that, might best fit their school. At Bradley, we use prong one, the substantial proportionality. And so for those who aren't familiar with that, that means that the proportion of our female student athletes, participants, needs to mirror that of the undergraduate female population. So if 43% of your undergrad students are women, then approximately 43% of your female participants, of your student athlete population, 43% should be women. So, it's funny though, because it's still gray, right? Because we can say we're meeting that, but what does that mean? What percentage is okay? And I remember asking Emmy Wilson from the NCAA in a meeting. I said, okay, I'm going to ask you, you're the one, when is OCR, Office of Civil Rights, going to get involved with a school? What percentage? Because it doesn't actually say what percentage you have to stay within. And she said, that's the $1 million question. I'm like, talk to me like I'm 10. Like, where do we need to be? And she said, within 4%. She said, that's what I would give you as a guide. You got to be within 4%. If you start to get above or below, consistently, for year after year, she said that's when you're going to see some OCR issues. But that's still, 4% is still a difference, right? And I think it's especially been challenging at some schools where the female population, undergraduate population, is growing, because that means that if we're using that prong, we have to grow with it. So it's a great question.
When,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
when
You
I
have the
was,
last word.
Okay. When I was women's golf coach here at Bradley, we had to play, I think, 6 matches so the men's basketball team could remain Division I. And Ron Ferguson, the athletic director, called me in and he said, "You're playing Chicago State in 2 matches in golf." And he said they have to get in their 6 matches so the men's basketball team could be Division I. Okay, so Chicago State arrives. We're at Donovan Golf Course. And they get out and they have high-top basketball shoes on. And then they took their equipment out. And I'm looking at it, and there was one girl had one of these demo bags for golf. It was this big, and about 40, 50 golf clubs in there. And I go, oh my gosh. So I go over there, and so she had 7, 8, 5 irons, 7, 8, 6 irons, and so forth. I start pulling clubs out. I said, you don't need all these. And so, she obviously didn't know anything about golf. And some of them were basketball players, some were golfers, and they got extra money for coming and doing this, extra scholarship money for doing this. So I thought, 10-stroke limit on each hole. So we go to the first tee, they tee off, and it's like, oh my gosh. So we get to the second hole, and the girl said, I'll just take my 10. And most of them finished up with a score of 180, because they just took their 10 and walked around the golf course. And
They could have beaten me.
but anyway, they had to do it so the men's basketball team could be Division I.
If you could join me to thank our panelists for their perspective. And you have a few minutes if you wanted to ask something one-on-one, or if anybody from student media is here. Thanks for your attentiveness, and enjoy the day.